Hello and welcome, my name is Recho and I am back with a new Trinity build. So I already covered a video on Trinity after she received her software work, showing off a build using Champion's Blessing. Now unfortunately Champion's Blessing is a bit of a annoying mod to use because it only stacks on healing yourself or allies and not heals for shields, and especially if you're playing solo it can be a bit difficult to stack up. So, and depending on the type of builds your squad mates are doing on public squads as well, it can also be very difficult to stack up in public. So I wanted to come back to Trinity and do a different build that doesn't use Champion's Blessing because it can be kind of annoying to play with, and although it can make her very powerful, giving her a very big crit chance buff, it is also just kind of annoying. So instead I wanted to have a build that focused more on what she's good at, her very big support elements, while still leading into her DPS side and capitalizing on just how absolutely tanky she is. But before I get too much into the build, I won't cover her abilities in great detail, as I already did that recently in my previous video I was just talking about. So if you want a more in-depth breakdown of her abilities, do watch that video, but I will go over what they do very quickly instead. Her passive will give you a buff to your health, as well as giving the same buff to all your other allies in your squad based on half of your current max energy. Your first ability will simply suspend an enemy in the air, make them immune to damage. You can have up to 3 of these enemies. They send out healing pulses, healing you and all the allies, and you can also shoot them. And you and your allies can also shoot them in order to gain health back themselves. The second ability will be placed on a single target. It will do true damage to that target over time, and each time it takes damage, they will send out a pulse of energy, restoring yours and any other ally within range of the energy pulse's energy meter. Third ability is called Link. It links Trinity link to multiple different targets, redirecting up to 75% of the damage Trinity takes to the target she is currently linked to, giving her that damage reduction. And her fourth ability will restore her own health and shields, as well as the health and shields of everyone else on the squad, as well as giving herself and every other person on the squad within range of the ability a 75% damage reduction for the duration of the ability. So the build, what's it about? Like I said, I wanted to have a more support focused Trinity build, and I really wanted to actually have the build not helmet off the first ability, because the first ability does actually give you a health gate, which although is not very useful for later on playstyles, especially for Trinity herself, because she's an amazing shield tank, so she doesn't need a health tank by herself. I thought having a health gate would be incredibly useful if you wanted to use Trinity as a support for a new player, and I do think Trinity, because of the health gate, is honestly the best support a new player can have right now. But her first ability is still her worst ability, and it's just the most obvious one to get rid of, so I ended up helmeting off her first ability for Raw instead. Raw works perfectly well on her because not only does it above our damage output, but it also be applied to other people in the area, so it also still gives us that support feel of Trinity. Moreover, my specific build is using a melee influence setup, and Raw as a factor damage buff does triple dip with melee influence, so I would highly recommend using Raw if you were to use the same weapon and or another weapon with melee influence. However, if you didn't want to use melee influence or wanted to use another weapon, any other damage over time setup on a primary or secondary will still benefit greatly from Raw, as it does double dip with damage over time effects. However, if you wanted to use a Raw damage setup, I would recommend using Zachar's Whisper instead. You won't get that support element that Raw does for all the teammates, but Zachar's Whisper is a much better damage buff for Raw damage because of how it scales with faction mods and also multi-shot. You could also go for some other options like Breach Surge, which gives you more area effect with your weapon attacks, and also gives you also multiplies the damage of your weapon for the multiple instances it creates. And if you're using a melee weapon, also gives you that self damage buff. So, and also some bit of crowd control as well, and everyone in your squad can take advantage of this as well. So that's also can lean to a bit of support element for her. I personally don't like using Breach Surge as much because Breach Surge needs to be like constantly casted, where Raw or Zachar's Whisper can just be cast once and then you have it active for like 40 seconds. But it's up to you. There's a lot of different abilities that you could go for. As for the rest of her abilities, as for the rest of her kit, it's very simple. We are utilizing her third augment, which armor strips every enemy that is currently linked to Trinity, and since her rework her link is no longer limited to just 3 enemies, instead scales our strength, so we'll be passively armor stripping enemies around us, also increasing our damage and also the damage of our teammates. Link also gives us amazing crowd control. We can also give damage reduction on crowd control. We also get the amazing damage reduction for our whole squad, and also healing for Blessing as well. So we have increased tankiness from ourselves. We can replenish replenish our shields immediately just by tapping the ability whenever they go down, making her an amazing shield tank. And we also give that damage reduction to players as well. And we do also have our second ability that we simply just cast whenever we need it. This build is very light on energy, so you'll find you don't need to cast your second ability very often. So if you're playing in a supportive role in a squad, you just use it whenever your teammates need it, or every now and then when you do need it yourself. So this is the Trinity build itself. Like I said, I have helmets on raw over the first slot, and this is a shield tank setup. So obviously we are using Prime Direction to increase our shields, and then we are using Link and Blessing for the damage reduction, and also Blessing to fully restore our shields. I'm using, as I said, a melee influence setup, so I am using Arcane Strike as one of my arcanes to increase the attack speed, to just increase the damage output of the whole setup. And I am using Combat Discipline and Arcane Avenger. These two work fantastically well in Trinity because Blessing also kills your health. So I can kill a few enemies, hit them off with Combat Discipline, activate an Arcane Avenger, and I never have to worry about dying because of Blessing. I tried doing this for my Champion Blessing setup, but Combat Discipline simply just doesn't damage you enough to make any actual meaningful effect with Champion's Blessing because of how it works, which is why I had to use a bit of a more funny key setup with Champion's Blessing. But this still setup works very well just by making use of Arcane Avenger instead of Blessing for the extra crit chance. I'm also using Archon Intensifier. You can use Umbral Intensifier if you wanted, to not have to to just get rid of that extra step of thinking. But simply with the Archon Intensifier, it does offer you more power strength. What I do is I just make sure that with Combat Discipline, I'm taking damage. So all I need to do is cast Blessing, which will heal me, and trigger Arcane Intensifier, so extra 30% strength, meaning I'll have 60% strength from Arcane Intensifier total. And then I just do that every time I go to recast Raw, so I can make sure I get the biggest damage buff from Raw that I can. And then we also have Blind Rage for the extra ability strength, and we are running Prime Continuity as well as Organ Message for ability duration. Stretch for some extra range. You don't need that much range, but it's definitely nice to have. A Biting Link, which is the augment for a third, and obviously Primed Flow as well, which not only helps us with our energy economy, but also gives us and every other person in our squad more health. So for my weapon, I am using the Gunsyn Prime. Like I said, you can use whatever weapon you want. It's entirely up to you. It's not specific to Gunsyn Prime. Gunsyn Prime is just an amazing weapon when it comes to melee influence setups, specifically blast melee influence setups. So our melee influencers are obviously our Arcane. Volatile Onslaught is the stance you want to be using for War fans. It's what makes Gunsyn Prime so good, because the Volatile Onslaught has a lot of multi-hits with the Warframe stance. And what a multi-hit is basically when you tap the melee when you tap the melee attack button once, you actually hit the enemy multiple times. Basically, it's multi-shot for melees. And with the forward attack stance for Volatile Onslaught, within the 4 attacks that the combo is, you actually hit enemies a total of 10 times, which is an insane amount of multi-hits, and what makes this weapon so amazing at applying status effects and so good at blast influence setups. Obviously, we have our Volcanic Edge and Vicious Frost for blast. We are running Struck and Touch for the electricity for melee influence, of course. Galvanized Steel for the crit chance and crit damage, most importantly. Blood Rush is our main source of crit chance. And then we've got Reaper Marines for the status chance. Berserker Fury for even more attack speed. Yes, I am running Berserker Fury and Arcane Strike, because the more attack speed, the faster we play status effects, and the even more lethal this setup is, and Condition Overload. We aren't running any faction mods because we have Raw, so we don't need to, but faction mods are incredibly important. If you didn't want to run Raw, but you did want to use a melee influence setup, because faction damage triple dips with melee influence, I would recommend getting rid of Berserker Fury for faction mod and simply just using Arcane Strike. But I do think it works best with Raw, Berserker Fury, and Arcane Strike. The Taxon is our companion of choice. This is because the Taxon is great when it comes to shield tank setups because of molecular conversion. It allows the Taxon to attack enemies and convert a portion of the damage it does back to our shields. And then we can also make use of Shield Charger and Guardian, which can be put on any two robotics, but only Taxon can make use of molecular conversion. Shield Charger will increase our max shields and also increase our shield regeneration. And Guardian will make it that once our shields gets fully depleted once, it will fully restore our shields back to max and then go on cooldown. And so you want to put them in this order because the order of precepts on companions matter. It's the precept will, the way the companion triggers abilities, it will check the first, then the second, and then the third, and so on when deciding which one it activates. Molecular Conversion is the last one because it has the shortest duration of the 3, and Guardian is the first one because Guardian only triggers when you have no shields, when your shields get depleted. So most of the time what we'll be doing is Taxon will check to see which ability activates. It will check Guardian. It knows it can't trigger Guardian right now because you have shields. It'll check Shield Charger, and then it will activate that, giving us the extra shields and the shield regen, which is what we want. Then that will go on cooldown, cooldown, and the next time it checks to activate an ability, it will see that shield charge is on cooldown, and it will activate molecular conversion instead. So that's what we want. We also obviously have Manifold Bond to lower the cooldown of all 3 of these mods. Momentumous Bond, so if our companion goes down by killing an Xmas unit, we can reduce the respawn timer by 18 seconds. Synth Deconstruct for extra health orbs, very nice. Calculated Redirection, Enhanced Vitality for general survivability for the companion. Assault Mode, so the companion can actually attack enemies, as will also be priming enemies for us. And Vacuum, as a must-have mod. And our companion's weapon is the Tactical. It is a chaining beam gun, which applies status effects extremely well. We are using Aptitude for status chance, Fast Hands for reload speed, Primal Shape for the fire rate and punch through, and of course the multi-chuck from the chamber, and the rest is just our elements. It has inherent electricity, we get radiation for radiation reload, magnetic for magnetic capacity, and then we also have viral from Malignant Force and rim rounds. For the other weapons that you aren't using for a primary DPS, it doesn't matter. If you're using like a melee like me, I would recommend doing any rifle and using Amalgam Serration for the utility, and if you're using and for your secondary, I also recommend using Amalgam Barrel Diffusion as well as the 2 Orca mods for some additional survivability and utility. If you're not using a melee as your main DPS, then I would recommend using the Predators instead for the utility it offers through its 2nd evolution, giving you sprint speed and slide, and its 4th evolution, giving you parkour velocity. Since I am using a quick attack build on a melee, I am running Naramon for the power spike passive, which makes it so that each time my combo duration runs out, it, instead of being fully depleted, I only lose 5 combo points instead. And speaking of, since I am running a melee setup, I am also running primary and secondary dexterity, which both increase my combo duration at max rank by 7.5 seconds, giving me a 20-second combo duration instead of just a 5-second combo duration, which wouldn't be needed if you weren't using a melee weapon. If you're not using a melee weapon, you wouldn't need the arcanes, and you could also run any of the other focus schools that you need. Xenarek will probably be the least useful because you have your 2nd ability for the energy you need. Vazarin you can make use for grouping. Yunara you can make use for a more controlled armor strip. Maybe you're going up against a tougher enemy like an Acolyte, and Link, for whatever reason, just isn't affecting them. It's rare, but it could happen, so maybe you want that backup armor strip. Matarai will probably be your best in slot, though, if you're not running a melee build, just for the extra utility offers like casting speed, power, strength, and everything else. Anyway, that is the end of this video. I do hope you enjoyed this more generalized Trinity setup. It works for both public play, solo play. It helps to support newer players to the game as they're trying to find their way through the game. You can use any weapon with it. It's a lot of freedom. It's a lot more freedom than my Champion Blessing build I had, because of it was a bit finicky the way you had to stack it, and Champion Blessing also only works on primary and secondary weapons, so you couldn't use a melee setup with it either. So I've really loved this build. I've honestly loved playing Trinity in general since the rework. I'm probably going to come up with another Trinity build at some point for a nuke setup with her. So wait for that if you're excited for it. And until next, and also do check out some of my other content to see if you like some of my other videos, and give me a like and subscribe if you do, and a comment. Feel free to leave any recommendations of videos you'd like to see me make in the future. And until next time, bye bye.